So I just watched another one of these Caspian reports. This is the same person as the Russian. Um, the way I have my watch later list set up is that I put all the stuff from the second half of 2014 in the list, but I had to add it on a source by source basis. So Caspian means I've made it up to C. Um, means I've got a while to go, but it means I'm going to be watching all the rest of the stuff that this channel put up for 2014. And I suppose when I'm done, I might not be done until the end of 2016, sort of thing. So I might have to go through 2 years of stuff to add up through the next one, kind of thing. So um, this is what happens when you have a huge list of stuff. But anyways, so I'm watching this. He's I should point out that I'm actually familiar with this person. His name is Mir Shivan. He's an Israeli economist. I'm familiar with him because he's done a lot of work with the Real News Network, which is something that Paul Jay put together when he was pushed out of the CBC by the Conservative government in Canada. And I'm not sure that Paul Jay would even say that much, but I mean it's clear as day, right? Anyways. This report is sharing a bit of a parallel with the Russian report in that it seems to be very heavily tilted towards an American intelligence perspective of things. He's basically presenting the idea that Saudi Arabia would open up under the king's direction if it wasn't for the religious conservatives that are pulling them back. Um, and I certainly think that he's explaining a dynamic correctly, but he didn't at all even begin to discuss the pressure that might exist from the outside. He tried to present it entirely as an internal debate where you have the monarchy pushing for modernization and the religious bodies pushing for stagnancy. The reality is that Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian state. The king has the final say in everything. If he wanted to, he could, let some heads roll, kind of thing, and those bodies would essentially do what he says. The idea that this conflict exists is itself kind of a mirage. Um, that's just not how authoritarian states operate. Um, it's kind of an error of, you live in a democracy. You look at how you see the world, and you want to apply your perception of things to everybody else. And I know I've seen enough from Cher to conclude that he's very conscious of try growing up in Israel and being relatively young, and he's I think he's in his 20s, although he might be in his 30s now, um, or he might not be though. And being relatively young, growing up in a society like Israel, you have to realize that you are bombarded with messages about how the Muslims and the Arabs are inferior to you. And I mean, growing up in the West here, in North America, we get a little bit of that, and it's getting worse, and everybody can see that, but it's nothing like Israel. Israel is a society based on a racial class divide, and that needs to be enforced, and it needs to be enforced through constant media bombardment. And if you're smart enough, you can see that, you can deconstruct it, but you're constantly on guard against it. So you're constantly trying to find ways to to disentangle it, to throw it off, and to see the people that you're told are inferior as equals, and you're constantly mentally adjusting, and all these sorts of things. And what I've picked up from Scheer is that he's in the process of doing that. He's picked up a lot of theory from the American pseudo left. In fact, they're American conservatives. Although they call themselves leftists, the media calls them leftists, and there's all this confusion about that. But I mean, it's their ideas are very right wing, and their entire perception of things is very right wing. And in the process, what they've done is they've projected themselves onto a different culture without recognizing that this is a different culture. They do have cultural differences. They're not the same, and their system isn't interchangeable with the system that you know. Um, he called the body the Saudi Arabian Parliament. Um, it's if you want to call it that. The comparison is so weak as to probably not even really want to bother. It's more like an advisory council. That's the correct monarchist way to look at it, right? So you have the king, and then you have the king's advisors, and the king appoints his advisors, but the king makes the decisions. And it's the same thing with these bodies, right? Um, when you look at the better way to understand things from my perspective, I'm speaking from a mostly European descended North American perspective, and the way I'm seeing it, the way I would interpret it, would be to look at the conflict between the king and the church in Europe in the Middle Ages, and the king always won, um, because ultimately the king had power, and the king made those choices, right? Um, Now it is different because there's not like in Saudi Arabia, the king and the caliph are actually the same thing. Um, they don't technically have a caliph, but for all intents and purposes, the Saudi king is the caliph, right? So it's even providing too much power to these religious bodies. What I'm getting at is that the conflict that he's describing is no doubt real, but the dynamics that he's constructing are um, created out of a desire for somebody to reverse their racist programming and see the other as themselves, which is itself um, blinded, let us say. I don't want to throw around insults that are not coming from any place of intent. So the Saudi system is different. So what's actually going on? Well, there's all this pressure coming in from the outside, right? And so the Saudi prince or the Saudi king, I'm sorry, he's the king. He makes it. It might look like the Saudi king is pushing reforms in as the moderate and all these sorts of things, but what he's really doing is he is carrying out policy directives from the hegemonic power in the region, which is the United States, which is trying to make changes to the society to, well, first of all, so that perceptions of Saudi society are changed in the United States, which is of great importance. If you're outside of North America, you might not realize how important that is, but it is of great importance that the Saudi Arabian reputation is modified to allow for continued alliance. I mean, all you have to do is look at Donald Trump's, uh, you know, ranting in the election campaign. Trump might not be the establishment, and he might not be reflecting establishment perspectives, but he is reflecting populist perceptions. And if you're the establishment and you recognize the importance of the alliance with the Saudis, you realize that those populist perceptions need to change. And so there's all this pressure coming in from the outside to push things down. The king is the agent of that, of course. But why is it not changing? Because, of course, the king does not actually want it to change. If he did, he would just put it through a decree, snap his fingers, and it would be done. But that entire um, uh, dynamic needs to be created so that they can push back to the outside. Um, and if you want to understand what's actually happening in there, that's the way to understand it. um, is that there's all this pressure from the outside to change, um, but there's a lot of pressure from the inside to not change. And this whole dynamic regarding the king that Cher is trying to present is really reducible ultimately to um, uh, public relations um, uh, projections from the United States State Department. That's the harsh truth of this. So um, when you run up against something like this, it's not always fair to make accusations immediately. Um, it's not clear whether Scheer is working with um, uh, compromised information or pushing that compromised information with intent. Um, and while I am familiar with him, and I have seen quite a bit of his interviews on the Real News, I'm not willing to state whether this is an issue of media manipulation or an issue of useful idiocy.